my mate is working with a black American professor to write some stuff around cultural competence, and they're just talking about, like, when they write something together, do they both have as valid a voice in writing that stuff? So that whole thing of, like, are you an ally? Who decides if you're an ally? Do I decide that I'm an ally? Did you decide you're an ally? Or actually, is that not for us to decide? Is that for the people who are marginalised and who have been subject to structural inequality? Is it for them to decide whether they want allies? And if they do want allies, who's a legitimate ally?
Folks, we're going to talk about prejudice. But let me start with some context on who I am. I'm a straight white male from the tri-state area. My friends growing up were predominantly straight white males, and the majority of the people that I work and go to school with are straight white males. So I don't really know a whole lot about prejudice from personal experience. I do, however, understand that I'm not the only person who is trying to make a better life for myself. And just because someone doesn't look or sound like me, that doesn't mean that they're my enemy. I like to think that I understand the difference between right and wrong. And right now, I think it's pretty easy to see that there's something wrong with what's going on in our country, and sadly, the world.
President's son said when he was approached about dirt on Hillary Clinton that the Trump campaign would love it.
That is generally what was said, yes.
The president himself called on the Russians to hack Hillary's emails.
There was a statement by the president in those general lines.
And numerous times during the campaign, the president praised the releases of the Russian-hacked emails through WikiLeaks.
That did occur.
Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton tells CBS News that 15 to 20 people were killed in a mass shooting in El Paso. It happened at a Walmart store. Congresswoman Veronica Escobar, who represents the city, calls the number, quote, shocking.
9 people have been killed in a second mass shooting in less than 24 hours. This time, it happened in Dayton, Ohio, at an entertainment district in that city. Police say they have killed the gunman.
The total number of votes given to each candidate was as follows. Jeremy Hunt, 46,656. Boris Johnson, 92,153. And therefore I give notice that Boris Johnson is elected as the leader of the Conservative and Unionist Party.
This summer, I was presented with the opportunity to visit England and Scotland to study the search for social justice through the Frederick Douglass Institute at Kutztown University. I was told that on the trip, I would be the only straight white male, which, if you're this far in the video, you'll know is a first for me. This was an opportunity to not only experience a new country, a new culture, and a new history, but to gain new perspective through meeting and speaking with people whose experiences I can learn from. Right now in the US, we have a lot of people who look and sound like me who, instead of listening to other people and learning about their experience, just want to, well...
Is the Trump administration currently running concentration camps at the border? Somewhat remarkably, this is a debate we are now having in the year 2019, as the administration builds out day by day a sprawling and ever-expanding system of irregular detention for desperate migrants who the president rails against and vilifies at every turn.
U.S. President Donald Trump is taking aim at 4 minority congresswomen with racist language. This on the same day that his administration says it has begun raids targeting thousands of undocumented immigrants. The president attacked the congresswomen in a series of tweets, writing, quote, "So interesting to see progressive Democrat congresswomen who originally came from countries whose governments are a complete and total catastrophe." He added that they should leave to go back to where they came from.
But 3 of the 4 women he targeted were actually born in the United States. And the 4th, Ilhan Omar, came to the States as a child and became a U.S. citizen in 2000.
They want to divide us. Instead of adding to the hate, my goal for this trip was to learn from others and gain a wider perspective on prejudice and discrimination during a time of conservative resurgence. The 3-week course consisted of in-class lectures on the Atlantic slave trade and its abolition, women's suffrage and the history of feminism in the US and UK, LGBTQIA+ civil rights progress, and various other social movements throughout US and UK history. Students also attended field trips to various cities, such as a tour of Preston, where we were staying, Manchester, known for its gay rights movement in the 20th and 21st centuries, and Liverpool, whose massive wealth and commerce was built on the profits from the slave trade. We even traveled to Edinburgh in Scotland, where Frederick Douglass himself spoke to insane numbers of people about the villainy of slavery. And that affected me, because those issues are still going on today. And I know everyone says that they're affected by this, and it's great to feel like you're part of the solution and not the problem. But in 2016, Donald Trump was elected president of the US, and Brexit was passed. And the majority of the rhetoric surrounding both of those campaigns focused on exclusion and xenophobia. My interest in learning others' perspectives was what inspired me to go out and interview a number of people. Some are UK citizens, others classmates, and some are immigrants from Europe and the US currently living in England. I wanted to know what their thoughts were on these issues.
If you look at our Brexit vote in 2016, there was a whole range of issues about whether we should leave Europe or not leave Europe. But one of the big things that was in the press on a regular basis in the lead up to that referendum was we've got too many immigrants, too many asylum seekers coming into the country, they're taking our jobs, all this kind of stuff. And in the 3 days following the Brexit vote, there was a massive peak against anybody who's not white, basically. It felt like once that vote had been passed, the people who perhaps had those opinions but had kind of been keeping a lid on it, maybe because they thought, oh, it's not politically correct to say this stuff. Suddenly it was like a license to say whatever you wanted to people, and it kind of took the lid off quite a nasty underbelly of racism, probably. When it comes down to it, it's probably racism.
Sometimes it's just too much. You're just like, enough. Like, I don't want to deal with this anymore. I don't want to explain anymore where I'm from, you know? And especially at work, when I was looking for a job, it was my first year at uni. I really struggled because all the CVs, all the interviews, when it came to the question about accent, to the question about the origin, the people just changed their face. They literally, like, they just switched. And it was like you're like an alien or something.
You know, the far right are having demonstrations and rallies on the streets of UK. And you know, this has all been since Brexit, and, you know, Boris Johnson was the celebrity behind Brexit. So I think, yeah, very dangerous times for both countries. And the fact that Boris Johnson, you know, has endorsed Trump, and you know, Trump has given Boris Johnson some bro love back. You know, I think two of the biggest nations in terms of importance in the world with far right leaders who are inept at doing the job, I think it's just a very dangerous place to be.
Regardless of whether or not you believe that the President of the US or the British Prime Minister are able to competently fulfill the duties of their office, there is a connection between what they say and how the public reacts. During the first week of the trip, our class was able to speak with Dr. Richard Benjamin, head of the International Slavery Museum in Liverpool. I asked if he felt there was a connection between US politics and the UK. He spoke about an act of vandalism that had occurred within the Maritime Museum, which shares residence in his museum's building. In the weeks leading up to my study abroad experience, Disney announced that Halle Bailey had been cast as Ariel for the new Little Mermaid film, sparking a huge backlash on social media regarding her ethnicity. Just days after Disney's announcement, Dr. Benjamin shared with us that someone had graffitied the N-word on 2 mermaid statues within the museum.
But what, you're telling me that there's a discussion in the US around a black actor going to play a mermaid, and then we have that 3-4 days later? There's a link, if you ask me, you know, and that's over the water, you know, over there. Yeah, it does affect what's happening in the UK and around Europe, because everybody talks. Look at the politicians. It's not hard to link everyone, is it? People in the UK, far right parties in places like Hungary and Sweden, where have you, and link them to connections in the US. So there is a global discussion going on, but equally the challenge to that, okay, there is a moment as well. So it's not as if people are not doing things. But yeah, there is a connection between what happens in the US and what happens in the UK. I think so.
The media is referring to the backlash as a sense of nostalgia, and that makes sense. Trump ran on the campaign of Make America Great Again. Support for Brexit primarily came from older generations. Nostalgia for the past, keeping things as they are, is a conservative value.
Because there are people who feel that Britain should be Britain, and Britain, it was like, you know, we've had our Great Britain, we were the empire, we were, you know, we had all that colonial power, and that was all marvellous. And we want to go back to this golden age of Britain being fabulous. And you just think, it wasn't fabulous when we had it. It was really exploitative. It was a bad thing anyway. And then, and what, you know, that thing where you think, well, the UK is like a tiny little country. It's such a tiny little country in the whole scheme of the world. So what makes us think that by leaving Europe, we're going to be some big, powerful political player?
This nostalgia that is seen in Western countries like the US and UK isn't just quarantined to these areas. Eastern Europe holds a similar view.
You see, countries like Hungary, Czech Republic, Poland, they didn't want to accommodate another culture within themselves because they were used to, for such a homogenic society. You know, you got like all white society, you don't have two discourses. However, now comes something totally different that they've never experienced before, that they don't know. They're scared. They're just like, what it's gonna mean for them. You know, what if are we actually gonna be annihilated by another culture? What is, you know? And there is no one to actually educate them on these terms. And the populace, what do? They're gonna say, oh yeah, I'm gonna literally, this is all fake, all what you hear in the textbooks, you know, it's just some smart people think they can tell you, you know, what to do, how to behave, what to feel, but it's not true.
Progress is still happening though, regardless of the amount of pull nostalgia has on society.
I think from a female point of view, yes, it's not that I agree with every woman out there. Oh my goodness, no. And not every woman out there agrees with me, because guess what? We're different people with different ideas. But the biggest boon for women with the internet is that traditionally we have been separated. And traditionally, yes, it is, we don't have the same access. But I do have time to sit and look through things on my tube journey. And I do have Facebook where I can put something up and about feminism, and a load of women like it, and we know each other. And some men do too, occasionally. A lot of men argue with you. But that is in the same way as, I suppose, you know, I have never been a tall person. I have always been a short person. If I argued about a tall person's experience, I would have no idea about it. I would just be thinking I did.
If I argued about a tall person's experience, I would have no idea about it. I would just be thinking I did. I never really looked at social issues in that way. For example, before going on this trip, I believed men could be feminists. But I understand the rationale behind the idea that that's not possible, because men don't know what it's like to be a woman.
It's not that men can't work hard for women's equality, but I just think the safety on the street, the pay gap, there's just hundreds of ways that men have this natural superiority in society.
There's a valid point there. I've never known what it's like to feel scared to be alone at night or in a new city, like one of my classmates assumed would be her experience.
My favorite experience was walking around London by myself for 5 or 6 hours. It was awesome. I did not think that I would ever be a person that enjoyed traveling alone, because I'm 5'4", 130 pounds, and a woman. Like, it just doesn't seem like it would be something that would not fill me with anxiety, but it didn't. It was really good.
That disconnect between the negative expectations and positive realities was shared by a number of my classmates.
I definitely took note of the fact that there wasn't a huge minority population in Preston, but like, I'd never felt, I guess, any tension because of it. I didn't have to change the way I behaved or anything. I didn't encounter any like open racism or anything. I think the overall vibe of Preston, or just England in general compared to America, is a little more down-tempo. I've talked to like foreigners that knew I was from America right off the bat. Like, they didn't even hear me speak. And it was just because of like the way I carry myself, whereas they like kind of keep to themselves a little more. We're a little more open to passing conversation and things. And at first, that in conjunction with the fact that there weren't too many minorities here, I kind of like felt like, oh, I don't know if this place is like, if it's cool or not. But like, it really wasn't that. And upon approaching people, everyone's really kind, actually.
We've had such positive and great experience. People are so nice and genuine. Like, even the person who tattooed Vita, we had some of the
Deep conversations. And I don't know if it's because of our take on traveling and how we interact with people and understanding like you're in a different culture, so don't expect an American experience in a different culture. Right. So that could impact our interactions as well. But I don't think that I've experienced anything. I mean, I've actually been really surprised. Like, it's just been like, we've had like really deep, unexpected conversations with folks that were like, wow, you know?
Especially after, like she said, the first night, we were just like, this is going to be a terrible experience.
Right.
But we've had one of the best experiences.
Right. And we're not, and and I'm sure that there's inequality and that there's like, you know, racism and all that, but we just haven't had that experience.
Right.
And it may be because we haven't been here long enough.
Right.
Maybe because we just haven't been in those spaces.
Right.
Or we haven't been with locals that have been in those spaces. Which, you know, I think that would account for that. But so far we haven't experienced it. Yeah. But that's not to say it's not here.
Preston, which boasts a gender wage gap of 16%, almost twice the national average, voted to leave the EU during the Brexit referendum. Whether it was over racial discrimination or because they just wanted to make Britain great again, I can't be certain. This experience taught me a lot about what it means to be an ally. I used to think that if I shouted my support for those who were marginalized, I was helping. If I yelled at people who look and sound like me, maybe I could convince them that we aren't that different from everyone else. But Frederick Douglass made such an impact because he was a former slave talking about the struggle of slaves. Susan B. Anthony made such an impact because she was a woman talking about the struggle of women. And Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is making such an impact because she is a Latina woman who is talking about the struggles of Latinx people. Kyle Korver, a professional basketball player currently playing for the Milwaukee Bucks, wrote an article for the Players Tribune entitled Privileged. He summarized something I learned on this trip when he said, "What I'm realizing is, no matter how passionately I commit to being an ally, and no matter how unwavering my support is for NBA and WNBA players of color, I'm still in this conversation from the privileged perspective of opting into it. Which of course means that on the flip side, I could just as easily opt out of it. Every day I'm given that choice. I'm granted that privilege based on the color of my skin. I am a straight, white male. Every day I am granted the privilege of opting out of this conversation, of sitting back, shutting up, and taking comfort in the knowledge that if I do nothing, I will be placed on the right side of a wall or the right side of a channel. And I know that if I stand up and yell out, that I will be seen as someone who understands the struggle that others experience, and I will hold my fellow white men accountable. But more than anything, I learned on this trip that I, as Kyle Korver said, have to do my best to recognize when to get out of the way in order to amplify the voices of marginalized groups that so often get lost.